All right, welcome everyone. Thank you very much for joining us for today's webinar on getting started with skills. My name is Remy Verstraete. I'm part of the marketing team here at Emsi Burning Glass, and folks are still logging in, so I'm going to kind of burn time here for a second as everybody gets settled. But I do want to thank you for joining us today. We've got two speakers. We have our very own Mr. Morgan Halpert, and we also have a very special guest speaker, Dr. Jacqueline Varsalona, who is the VP of Institutional Advancement at Wilmington University in Delaware. And I will go ahead and lay out the roadmap for our time together. We're going to start with Morgan, and he's going to walk through a brief section on why skills and why now. That's going to kind of lay the theoretical groundwork, if you will, for the rest of the presentation, talking about what skills data is, why it's significant, and why it's so valuable in a higher education context. And then it's going to go to Jackie, and she's going to walk us through the work that she's been doing and leading at Wilmington University as far as the actual practical application of applying that theory and creating a skills-based framework for program evaluation. And then she's going to share a specific example of how they've used that to make some adjustments to their MBA in finance program. And then we'll have a little bit of time for Q&A at the very end. And speaking of Q&A, as we go through the presentation and questions arise, please do submit those using the questions box. I have these two screenshots here because depending on your system and how you logged in, it might look a little bit different. But essentially, you want to look for either the questions panel or the questions box in your control panel. Should be somewhere about 2/3 of the way down. So just type in questions there. Go ahead and click send. Those will come through to us, and then Morgan will walk through those at the very end of the presentation. But no need to wait, no need to hold out. As soon as you think of a question, go ahead and submit it. And the other thing is, yes, the webinar is being recorded, and yes, we will send a link to the recording to you as soon as it becomes available. So no need to worry if you need to dip out early or if something comes up, we'll be sure and get that recording to you. So that handles the housekeeping portion, and now I'm going to hand it over to Morgan for why skills and why now. So take it away, Morgan.
Thanks, Remy. Yeah, so I'm really excited to chat with you all today. So my role, as kind of Remy mentioned, is to set the framing for the really great work that Jackie and her team have done over the past year or so. So I'm going to start at a bit of a higher level, and then I am going to zoom in a little bit. So in a very technological nutshell, we've been providing labor market data to institutions for quite a while. I'm sure many of you use this data. It encompasses traditional labor market data, government data. It encompasses job postings data for that real-time demand, and then the people data for the supply. And one of the most common use cases for the data is to relate it directly to programs, to understand their alignment and articulate it to stakeholders in the market. And the most common problem that arises is that the specificity internally about our programs does not match the specificity of the labor market and making that relationship. So I suspect that many of you, when trying to map a program into a zip code, have thought this just isn't quite right? There's a uniqueness to your program that simply doesn't come through in the zip code and in those buckets. And if that uniqueness doesn't come through, how can we intelligently map it against the market? And I was actually working with someone on this exact problem yesterday when we were working in one of our software tools. It was frustrating to try to take the nuances of their program and put it into the correct bucket, right? And then you could add scale onto that. How do we do it not just for a program, but for a lot of programs? And so a shift in our work at Emsi has, over the last little couple years, has been to actually connect internal data like curriculum and alumni data and map it to external data sets so that relationship becomes more transparent. So let me show you a little bit of what that looks like. So here is the kind of the common framework that folks use. So you have the three different stakeholders of people and companies and us, educational institutions. And as you can see, people and companies are speaking in a lingua franca of titles and skills, job titles and skills. And at the same time, educational institutions are speaking in terms of degrees and zip codes. And that current framework requires a translation, right? And that mechanism is the SIP to SOC crosswalk, right? And so a new problem has arisen even with more recency in that the people and companies are asking educational institutions more about the job titles and skills and outcomes that they map to as compared to those program names. So educational institutions are increasingly finding themselves on the outside looking in and miscommunicating as a result. And this crosswalk, as many of you know, is not dynamic, right? It's a stagnant hierarchy, and the nuances that can be captured in the title of a program are good, but the market is constantly changing. Right? There's lots of reasons why it can fall short. And so this method is not flexible or specific enough to match the changing market, right? Enter the frustration I mentioned earlier, which is at its base is due to trying to fit our programs and offerings into a very rigid and stagnant structure. So at Emsi, we said, what would allow us what can allow us to take a different approach that wouldn't require some kind of static grouping, one that could track quicker and more clearly against the labor market. And so our hypothesis, which is that skills are the connecting language for that clear connection and articulation. So we began applying the same natural language process that we do to job postings to internal curricular and alumni data, right? And so that language of skills is dynamic, and it can show really specific things about our programs. And because it's a mechanized natural language process, it can be scaled across the institution. So it's a smart tech-driven mechanism that allows for clear communication. And that is both specific and flexible. And so we know with higher resolution what is being taught where in terms of skills, and can articulate that to our faculty, our external stakeholders like students and corporate partners, the market in general, to students as they are persisting and selecting courses. We can make really clear connections to their outcomes. So that makes sense, but what does it actually look like? So as kind of a fun visual example here, let me see, I got lost in my notes here. Yes. Yeah, what does that look like? So here is on the left, the SOC code approach, and on the right, the skills approach. So you can see how the occupation approach is derived. It's a top-down nesting of categories, whereas the skills approach is derived from the bottom up. It's organic. It is a living taxonomy. And what the skills approach allows us to do is to understand what's happening in these unique roles in the market with more dynamism and more specificity. So with that same language of skills applied to the curriculum, we can map to these unique roles in the market. So you can see here on the left, marketing manager is one of the buckets in the occupation approach. But on the right, we would find the role of marketing manager, and maybe there's even specifics about the role of marketing, digital marketing versus written marketing, or some other type of marketing role. So we can see that specific about a particular region, say a marketing manager in Boise is different than one in Denver. And that is not explicit in the SOC code. So as the role changes due to new employers that are moving into the area or new skills that are needed in the digital marketing world, it's seen dynamically in the skills data, whereas in the occupational data, there would be, it's not explicit, and there would be a lag. So our masters in digital marketing tagged in the same language can relate it to those changes that are happening in the market dynamically. So rather than defining relationships by their category, skills allow us to categorize by relationship, and the tagging work, the institutional curricular tagging, allows us to make that really clear connection into those specifics of the market. So that's the framing that Jackie and Wilmington started with to do their good work, and I'll pass it off to her.
Thank you, Morgan. And it is really intriguing what Morgan just shared with you all. Really inspired us to want to start to go down the path of figuring out if we could take on this kind of research using Skillaby as the product that Emsi had presented to us, that takes everything that Morgan was just talking about and puts it into a nice user interface and allows users to, run those hypotheticals and really study their curriculum through that lens. And that was very inspiring to us. There was a small group of us that were tasked with kind of looking for choices out there of what to invest our time and resources in to better improve our research abilities and to provide as many stakeholders as possible more transparency into our alignment. So thanks, Morgan, for inspiring us. And because of that, we did start a process of wanting to implement. So I'm here today. It's nice to see you all here to learn this. I'm hopefully here for the right reason, which is to tell the story of how we structured our project, how we gained buy-in across our organization and support for this important research, and how then we implemented that project. And it's an interesting story. Right now we're in the middle of our first year pilot. So I am able to share a case study, an early case study towards the end of my presentation, and the findings are still coming in. So, in a few months from now, we'll have a much more rigorous report to, match back to, where we started, which was just simply being inspired by this. We also were wrestling with the same things Morgan was talking about, the limitations of understanding our program alignment with the workforce when we're limited to just that SIP-SOC relationship. So before I go too much further, I just wanted to give a little bit of background about Wilmington University, because I'm hoping that you might share some similar characteristics to our characteristics. And who we are is kind of important in the change culture that I'm going to talk through. We are an organization, we're a private nonprofit university headquartered in Delaware, but we serve 20,000 students, around the nation and internationally. And our mission is centered on ensuring that there's access and affordability for education, but also understanding our student population, which is a very non-traditional working adult. And those working adults are all ages. They could be 18 years old, they could be, mid-level career, they could be looking for post-retirement options. And what they have in common is that they want to know the value of their education. They want to know they can put it to use right away. And they're working at the same time. Most of our students are working part or full time at the same time and trying to balance that with their education. So their interest in choosing where they're going to go for education is really focused on the value add. And my role at the university, I'm the Vice President of Institutional Advancement. We are focused primarily on telling the story of our programs, to making sure that the marketing efforts and the communication efforts appropriately tell the value story of each program that we have. And next slide, please. So, I'm rooted coming from, the marketing and admissions and prospective student side of the house, but, ensuring that you're telling a good story and a value proposition is true for everything along the continuum of working with students and alumni, ensuring that we're delivering on our mission. And so that was why I got involved and why I was inspired and why many folks with me were also. So, we kind of took an assessment. Where are we on this? How rooted into this kind of research are we already? And truthfully, we're very rooted into it. Every program chair is studying their program in terms of its alignment with the workforce, whether or not they're bringing the right courses and technology or skills that they need to make sure that they're equipping their students and graduates with the right tools to be successful in the workplace. That has long been true. But as I mentioned before, it had its limitations. Just simply looking from a SIP to SOC, alignment doesn't tell the whole story. Certainly not necessarily in terms of what might set our university apart from others. And that's important right now. You want to know what makes you distinguishable and what you're teaching. And we call it products on my side of the house, but the programs that we're offering to our students are really what can set us apart. And we wanted to be able to tell that story. So thanks to Emsi Burning Glass, we were able to talk through what a project might look like around this and get some tips and understand how other clients were using this. But then we set out to go and get endorsement, from our leadership to invest time and resources in this. Next slide, please. So we thought the first thing we should do is really be able to articulate the use cases. What would we use this research for? And after a lot of discussions, it was whittled down to these 4 key use cases. First and foremost, our students. They require more transparency around how what they're learning is going to benefit them in the workforce. How is that going to help them meet their goals, whether they're starting out a career, changing careers, skilling up, looking for advanced education, trying to stay competitive and marketable themselves. That was going to be a huge benefit of this research. Second, our curriculum, just as I mentioned, we wanted to really be able to look under the hood in greater detail and be able to validate where we're absolutely in alignment and where there might be opportunities to improve and add new offerings into our suite. We wanted to become more visible to prospective students. I'm sure enrollment's on everybody's mind right now, and being able to appropriately tell the story, accurately tell the story of the value of your programs is going to do a lot when you're working with prospective students. They want to know that more and more these days. And we have a lot of strategic partnerships. We have academic and corporate partners, and those employers that are out there that are our partners, they're struggling to find talent for their pipeline, and we know that. And so to be able to go through this research and tell the story for ourselves, but also then be able to tell the story of our alignment with their specific jobs that they're looking for, really enriches that relationship that we're building with them. Next slide, please. So this is a little bit of an eye chart, but I thought it would be important to show you all because this is kind of an artifact that we took around to all the one-on-one meetings and little group meetings that we had with people to get them to understand the bigger picture and their role in this and why they're being tasked to kind of look at this with us and participate. And so this is basically a way to look at what I just went over, those 4 use cases. But it gives you a sense of the interconnectivity of the different areas and stakeholders around our university and outside of our university that would benefit from this work, and kind of a flow of how that information might go from point A to point B or point F, whatever. And it starts with that curriculum assessment. So doing that research allows you to learn 2 things right off the bat. First, where you're in alignment, what you're doing well. And what you're doing well needs to be talked about. And assessing that, validating that gives you a great set of information, whether that's skill keywords, whether that's just, general alignment with specific occupations, but it validates, that you are in alignment, and you can take that information over to the folks that are working with speaking directly with current students or prospective students, whether that's your marketing team, your website team, the career services people, the advisors, faculty advisors, anybody that could inspire a student to see the value of their education, basically. Let them know and have some more transparency around what they're picking up along the way and how that's really going to benefit their resume and their job interviews. So that feeds over to kind of use case 2, making sure you're equipping those students to market themselves. Back to the curriculum, where you're not in alignment. That's going to set off hopefully a lot of productive conversations, and it did for us. We have lots of systems and processes for evaluating curriculum, making sure that things are validated by market research. But this is giving one more, very more specific ability to engage conversations around that and really point to the things that you need to build into that curriculum. And that could be small or large. It could be as small as just adding another unit into a course, something that just needs to reinforce one particular skill or a handful of them. Or it could blossom out to, missing course that needs to be added and potentially replace another. It could be about adding an entire micro-credential or a certificate or a concentration, allowing this new avenue, that your university or college might be missing. Bring that into your suite. And that sets off, lots of stakeholders are involved in that. And our goal was not to create a separate process. It was just to show how this research might fit into existing processes. And as a result of all that work, you have an updated suite of programs. You have more to talk about. You have more specificity to talk about. You can go to your employer partners. You can talk about very specific offerings that you have that will benefit their hiring goals. And, it just blossoms from there. Ultimately, you're raising the visibility of your school and you're delivering hopefully on your mission. And that's what we felt like we could show through this graphic. Next slide. So again, not to beat a dead horse, but you can't talk about the benefits enough. When people are faced with an ask of either money or time, or you're going to take their staff and borrow them for a little bit, they want to know what's in it for them and how they're going to benefit and how this might not be an additional workload. It's something that's going to cultivate what they're doing right now and improve what they're doing right now. So just matching this work to the program review process. They're already looking at curriculum and trying to decide, what might be missing, how can I enhance this? Are there redundancies within my program or within a fellow chair's program, or even redundancies outside into another academic college? This would allow more insight into that. All the time we're thinking about what else should we bring to market. So this could be ways to generate new ideas for programs or micro-credentials. Provides all that wonderful language to work with students directly and be able to show them and point to them like how their resume is going to improve through the iterative learning that they're doing. Your marketing becomes more sticky because you have more relevant keywords now at play. Hopefully people that are searching for upskilling are going to be typing that in and searching for education providers that can help them with that. And your partnership conversations are going to improve too. Next slide. So, the goal was to get, funding, and approval to proceed with this. And funding's not the end. It's also, borrowing people and human resources. But we thought before we make like the official pitch, we would go around and talk about this, as I mentioned before, go on the circuit and listen. Really, the important thing was to listen and be able to understand what people's challenges might be. Where are they on the, the spectrum of research? Is this going to step on things that they're doing already? Is this going to be something that's going to reinforce what they're already doing? And what are their key concerns? So we went on kind of a listening tour. And the 4 primary concerns that came up, of course, were about people. What do you need them for? How long do you need them for? What will they be asked to do? Our program chairs predominantly were selected to be part of this process and go through this research with us. And they're very busy. They've got lots of responsibilities. And this was going to be a potentially perceived as a heavy lift. So we wanted to make sure that we understood what those concerns were. And that helped inform our strategy to build out kind of a concrete meeting schedule, concrete user guide, letting people know kind of what they needed to do. And so they really firmly understood their role. In addition, and this is a big one, we actually spent probably more time on this second thing than we did on a lot of other steps here. But the way that this process works is that you take your courses and all the related course materials, all the language, the syllabus, everything that you have, bundle it up and send it over to be analyzed with artificial intelligence, machine learning, and humans. And what comes out the other end are your courses through the lens of the skills, and they're highlighting the skills that you are teaching in each course. So that's really a big deal, and selecting which courses was a very important decision. And what we learned from Emsi is, a lot of times schools will want to analyze a program, and they'll take those courses relating to that program and analyze that. And we did do that, but we started like one level higher than that, because we knew that when you think about the workforce and you think about, your region or, whatever you're interested in studying, it's not about programs. It's more about industry, right? It's about where are the hiring trends, where are people going to get jobs, and how then do those align, right, with their programs? And that's back to that SIP-SOC kind of limitation. You know, we knew we're actually, you know, Wilmington University is adjacent to Wilmington, Delaware, which is one of the credit card capitals of the world. We have like every bank here, and they're hiring at a very steady pace, but they're also challenged by finding the right talent to meet their needs. So knowing that, you know, finance and technology, and these were very, very high hiring trends, we wanted to think about things in terms of kind of a cross industry bucket. So we decided to go into fintech was one. We looked at like taking the courses that were related to these big buckets. So fintech was one, and we had two others. Then find all the programs that represent that kind of, you know, focus. So in fintech, you know, you're talking about your business, your, you know, finance, your accounting, management classes, and then you also have all of your technology, your cybersecurity, your artificial intelligence programs, applied technology. So we knew that if we could kind of bundle those together, that what would happen as a result of that is we would be selecting faculty, you know, chairs to participate that were across different academic colleges. And the idea was we would come up with hopefully some interdisciplinary solutions and recommendations to bring some new things to the market that would meet the needs of that hiring. That was our strategy. I spent some minutes on it right now, and we definitely spent some minutes on it when we were deciding how to do that. But, you know, going through that process, you know, thoughtfully was really important because you walk away also knowing who all the players are going to be, who are all the chairs that you would need to tap to participate, and you have some good, you know, constructive conversations about their availability. So a lot on that note, second bullet, but I'm glad we went through that process. And, you know, back to the nuts and bolts of it, people are concerned with their technology abilities. You know, everybody's on different parts of the spectrum of comfort with technology. And what we wanted to do was, A, support them, make sure that they understood, and we demoed the solution, showed them, it's pretty, you know, intuitive in general, but just while we were doing that, we were instilling this sense that, you know, it's not about the technology, it's about the good research questions, that you're being selected to participate on this because you have an interest in improving your program. Let's stay on that. Don't let the technology hinder you. We had wonderful support from Emsi Burning Glass, Gavin and Laurie, shout out to you guys. They have been with us every step of the way and available to answer questions either about the technology or just about, you know, the findings. But we also had some folks inside that were comfortable in the technology. So we just basically said, if you need help, it's there for you. And the last piece was interesting too. When you think about research and people's comfort with ambiguity, you know what I mean by that is some people love things to be very prescribed, you know, and if you're talking about pulling a whole group of faculty together, and what we had was probably about 30, 35 people, they're going to be on all ends of the spectrum of comfort with, you know, how specific do you want me to do this? Are you going to tell me exactly what I need to do? Versus some that just love research. They would go down every rabbit hole possible and spend lots of time thinking about, you know, what they might find out. So we had to accommodate both. So we created a user guide. We did some step-by-step. This informed the way that we mapped our whole program, honestly, and we built it like a course. So we had like exercise 1, exercise 2, exercise 3, and we knew that people would kind of get the hang of it early in the process, and they'd be more comfortable opening up a little bit more and asking some more bigger questions that would benefit their research once they got their feet under them. So kind of very, very productive process. You know, this does take time. You have to go around and talk to different people. But by doing that, you know, you're so prepared to then go and pitch, you know, why this is useful, why now, who's going to be impacted, how much money is it going to cost, how long will this take, what will be the early wins, what will be the long-term wins. You're super prepared at that point. And of course, it was approved. So yay, we celebrated and got right to work. If you could go to the next slide, please. Launching, really, I mean, getting the buy-in was huge, like making that pitch, but you really had to reach out to the people that were going to be doing this work. And that was going to be our faculty and our chairs. They would learn about this the same way we would learn about it. We would go through kind of the big picture, tell them what's in it for the students, what's in it for them. But most importantly, we wanted them to feel like why we needed them, not somebody else, we needed them. They are the subject matter experts. No one knows their courses better than them. They can best tell the story of whether or not what we were getting back in the analysis was accurately explaining what was being learned in that course. And vetting through that was going to be a very, very important piece of this puzzle. So we wanted them to understand how valuable they were, and that this isn't something new. This is something that's going to reinforce what they're already working on. They're already looking to see if they're aligned with the workforce. They're already wondering, if their students are getting jobs. This is going to allow them to get insight into how they're actually preparing their students for those jobs. They're asked to think about new interdisciplinary options, new certificates, maybe some micro-credentials, and they're an active part of our conversations with our partners. So, needless to say, everybody was excited. And I know that might not be the case at a lot of organizations. It all depends on their time, their availability, but we did a really good job just helping them understand, the limit, how much we would need from them, how much time we would take from them, and all the benefits that they're going to have at the end of that. If you could go to the next slide. Again, just nuts and bolts, my advice about how we formed a team around this. It was important that we had executive level sponsorship. Our assistant vice presidents of academic affairs that oversee the colleges were big advocates. They were big supporters. They understood what we were trying to do, and they were the ones interfacing more regularly with the faculty. And we're able to be ambassadors, and hearing it from that top level that this is important, this is an initiative for the university, was important. So you want to have that. The project managers, I was one, and like I said, I'm coming kind of from the administrative side. Someone had a wonderful idea to pair me with the dean of our College of Business. Her name's Kathy, and I was so fortunate to have Kathy partner with me on this. She and I, are two sides of the coin, but very, very wonderful tag team. She was able to express to me, some of the challenges from the faculty lens. I think there were 2 accreditation visits during our first group that happened. The college got reaccredited, and then one of our programs did too. And that takes time. It takes time from people, and it really helped me, keep the project schedule realistic and supportive of those faculty. And, she's speaking the language of her, work and encouragement to have them looking at their curriculum anyway. This is what they're doing anyway. So she was able, I learned a lot working with so many academic people, and it was very eye-opening to see where people feel like they get stuck and what unsticks them, and that is a wonderful result of this research, honestly. It's kind of like a change management exercise, in a sense, while they're actually pulling real world and real usable findings from the process. But you kind of have to take the temperature of readiness around that. We had all the faculty, like I mentioned. We had a software support team, and we also, there is a kind of a little bit of a heavy lift that you'd be asking like your registrar and your curriculum folks. Like when you know what courses you want to put into this research, they have to go and bundle up all the course materials. And we got that done, and it was pretty seamless. But it is, all transparency, it's a little bit of a heavy lift at that stage. Okay, next slide, please. And then we launched, and part of that launch was, setting out a schedule, doing the work with Emsi to analyze the courses and getting all of that prepared to show. As far as the schedule goes, we kept it pretty aggressive. Kathy's advice was, if you don't stay on it regularly, other competing, priorities start to steal your time. And so we very clear from the start that this would be an every 3-week pace. We would meet with Emsi every 3 weeks and just talk about basically like a support call. We would ask folks like, when you finish your first exercises homework, send us a note on things you might be stuck on, questions you might see, snafus in the technology that you might want some more clarity around. And, are you seeing some great stuff that you want to share with the group? We'd ask them to kind of send that, and we would look for trends, send that off to Emsi so that they could best prepare and support us on that next call. And if one person has a question, tends to be most people have that same question, they just didn't ask it. So being able to walk through real world challenges, having Emsi team bring up on screen and walk through and emulate what that person had gone through and what they were seeing. Lots of light bulbs were going off where people thought, oh, okay, great, yeah, I thought that I was misinterpreting that too, okay. And it was just kind of like a support, support opportunity. And then they would learn about their next exercise. We would give them their homework, and they would go off and do. And we would say, see you in 3 weeks. So to help with that, one of our faculty generated a user manual. Not surprising, he's from the College of Technology, so he made a very prescriptive step-by-step for people that might have lost their way a little bit and just needed a reminder on how to get back on track. That was very helpful. And in general, the homework was, and the assignments were very much focused on iteratively, I guess I would use the analogy of building a house. The courses that they're asked to look at first and foremost are the bricks, and they need to be sound in order for the rest of the analysis to really look at those benchmark outcomes and really start to find out where those gaps are in your curriculum. You have to have solid bricks first. You have to make sure that the analysis and research that happened to your course is accurate. Are those truly the skills, or we would even open it up to say knowledge, skills, and abilities? Are those really being taught? Or was the AI, picking up the skill out of context or something? So you really do need that human touch. And sometimes skills are missing. You're teaching them, that's happening. The student's walking away with that skill, but for some reason it's missing from the course materials. And that was an early win. Just identify what those are. Let's go and reinforce our course descriptions and hopefully, let people know that these are really high in demand skills and we're teaching them. So win-win. So that was kind of the first process. Then we asked people to start looking at those benchmarks. What are their programs most aligned to prepare their graduates for? What are those job bundles? And as Morgan's chart shows, it's not a linear discussion. Job titles and related jobs are all kind of in like clusters. Someone might have an interest in an area, and they're just not sure. They could go into like 3-4 different directions. And what this allowed faculty to see were, let's bundle all those together and still see if you're in alignment with that. Is your curriculum effectively, leading towards, when you look at those job postings for those jobs, is it aligned? And that's where all the fun really started to happen. That's when things were clicking for the chairs and they were saying, ooh, okay, all right. I could see that I might need to start developing in this direction. I'm missing this kind of information. I really know that I need to tell my students to look at these kinds of jobs because there's a huge growth in that sector. Let me first make sure that my curriculum is teaching that. So, we wanted to, celebrate the wins. People want to jump to the gaps right away and start solving the problem, but we wanted them to slow down and be able to say what was really working well. Don't glaze over that process, because being able to effectively tell the story of your program was one of the key use cases. So we wanted to remind them of that. And at the end of the day, we give them kind of an open-ended time to start really getting into that research and follow whatever rabbit hole they wanted to go down. We wanted to support them and provide them the ability to use MC Analyst to go out and look at job projections to really validate their hunches. And then ultimately they're tasked with drafting their recommendations, which would get presented to our leadership in the normal process. And everyone's pretty excited because it seems like this is kind of doing some work that they were already doing, just giving them so much more validation. So I'd like to just share one of our case studies. If we could go to the next, I guess, 2 slides. We asked our MBA chair to look at his finance certificate specifically, or concentration specifically. And he was able right away to validate that the majority of those courses were absolutely in alignment. And not only in alignment, but he found some of the courses to have such high frequency skills that were in absolute demand, high demand skills, and those were articulated. And so those are the things that we need to, promote more. At the same time, he saw some opportunities. He saw some needing to strengthen our program more in a global sense, making sure the global element was involved. And he saw lots of opportunity for positions that are looking for people that have their stockbroker's license, they passed their Series 7 exams. So with that in mind, next slide, he developed some recommendations. This is just some examples of what you might pull from this. He wants to replace a course, he wants to add a course, he wants to update 2 courses and reinforce some of the curriculum inside those 2 courses. And he was inspired even to bundle several kind of niche areas into 9-credit micro-credentials. So he was real excited, and he's still kind of moving forward with that. And we are going to to keep it open-ended, because you just, the rabbit holes start appearing and you want to start going down them, and you want to give people that are inspired like this time and, the ability to continue to research. So that was our function. I hope this was useful. Again, really, it's been an interesting research, obviously for the outcomes, but also just to understand your organization in terms of its change readiness and ability and focus and interest in prioritizing this maybe over other things, this kind of work. And we saw a lot of benefits. And so I hope that was helpful. And I think from here, I'm going to pass it back to Remy.
Yes, fantastic. Thank you, Jackie. Thank you very much for walking us through that. It really is helpful to get the kind of behind the scenes walkthrough of the actual nuts and bolts. I loved how you highlighted that the technology is this powerful tool that generates insights, but then at the end of the day, you need people, the executive level buy-in, the faculty, you need people to apply it effectively. So thank you very much for sharing. So what's going to happen now is we are going to transition to Q&A time, but as we do that, I just want to give all our viewers a heads up that I'm about to launch a poll, and the poll question is probably going to kind of fill up your whole screen. So don't be alarmed, that's coming. And the way to make the poll disappear is to respond to it. So the sooner you answer, the sooner you'll get control of your screen back. So I'm going to launch that here, and the point of this is just to help us know how we can best serve you after the webinar. So if, as you've been watching this, you've been thinking this is really intriguing and exciting and we want to learn more about it, go ahead and let us know by answering one of those two yes questions, whether you're new or a current client. And that will give us a heads up to reach out to you after this. And of course, feel free to say no if you're just here to kind of watch and listen in as a fly on the wall. That is perfectly fine as well. So I'm going to let that run for a little bit longer. I see the responses coming in currently. Morgan, if you, I think you have access to the questions. So if you want to go ahead and start fielding some of those, that would be great.
Yes, you bet. So there's some very specific questions in here, which is fantastic, but there also seems to be a theme around a couple things. So I am going to start with kind of the theme of kind of skills transcript world. And so we actually aren't doing the work to do that skills transcripting. But we're keenly aware that that's an ask, and folks are really interested in using our skills in those types of smart resumes, both on the higher ed side and in our enterprise clients, like our company clients. So hopefully hopefully that provides some clarity on that. So a couple questions about SIP and SOC codes. A SIP code is an IPEDS classification of instructional program, and a SOC code is occupations in the workforce, standard occupations. And so IPEDS is reported to the NCS, and the SOC codes are put up by the government, right? So that's what we've been able to use in the past couple of years, and now we have a new skills orientation. Let's see, there's a couple questions on kind of micro-credentialing. Jackie, I don't know if you wanted to jump in and take a micro-credential question. I know you guys did do some of that work.
Yes, and I did mention how our MBA chair has found 4 potential ones. And I think that it illustrates that going through the process of looking at gaps, and I keep saying rabbit holes because you do have to kind of question, a certain direction, maybe a benchmark outcome collection of occupations that maybe you hadn't thought about before. And so I think his strategy was to start there and then start to look at the things he was a little less comfortable with, because I think chairs and the students, everybody kind of starts to get a sense of what is standard operating procedure for, say, a finance program or something. But what we're wanting to teach all of us, the students included, is look what the marketplace is telling us. Look what these employers are looking for. This is new. This is a new area. And so the platform does allow you to kind of select some things you might be less familiar with, and then still run that gap analysis against that. And so that is kind of his approach. That's how he came up with those micro-credentials.
Yep, great. I'm also seeing a question about outcomes in here, using outcomes and the skills associated with where folks are from this program, what they're doing and where they're working compared to the curricular tagging that we've done. We've actually done some really interesting analysis on the relationship between those two things. And so both are very important in looking at aligning our curriculum. But there's also an interplay to see really high specificity between what somebody is putting on a social profile or within their description of the work that they're doing in the marketplace versus the courses that they took and the skills that we think are most important within a course versus maybe what the job role that they have is. So really cool. There was another one about kind of instead of taking the program and working to the market, actually looking at market signals and working backwards. Yes, that is a pretty common use case for a new program development, right? And Skillaby and Analyst, which are the products that Jackie has. They're able to do that with a combination of those. Being able to see what a specific employer partner, maybe they already have a partnership with them, but there's this other role within that business that would potentially be an option for them to expand into. So how do we understand that role and then create potentially a custom micro-credential or non-credit work even for those kinds of folks. Let's see. So a lot of questions about the inputs that we're using from the institution. We have tagged in the language of skills everything from an entire description of a program to competencies to weekly learning objectives to standard syllabi documents. We have worked assessment objects. We have done a lot of, there's been a lot of variance of what we've tagged and related to the market. The key there being the actual skills connecting that input to the output, right? Another question about SIPs and SOC codes. Can you get started doing this work without having a really strong understanding or frame of reference for SIPs and SOC codes? Yes, you can. It's not reliant upon that hierarchy. Let's see, they are really pouring in here, which is fun, but it's making me have to read quickly.
I saw a question about accreditation.
Yeah.
And I wish I could answer that fully because we're so early into our process, but I can say that our goal was not to supersede our normal process for any change that we would make, our curriculum changes, our new programs. Everything would go through its normal review process. But my hunch is that the accrediting bodies would appreciate this, the validation and the source of the reasoning behind bringing it to the table. I think it's going to find a new chapter, I guess, or section in our program, our proposals that come through that currently, talk about job outlook, but now we'll be able to go even in more depth and give that validation as to why it's coming through. So my guess is that the accrediting bodies would appreciate that.
Kind of in the theme of the first, within the first theme of kind of like skills transcripts, we're also seeing does this help career services folks articulate skills on resumes? Absolutely. That was something that was key for Jackie and their group in that kind of prioritizing the learner, right? So being able to make transparent the skills in the curriculum allows the student to know what their skills actually are. And we've done some really interesting testing on this. Students asking learners to say, what skills do you have? But then giving them a pick list of say, like, here, what are do you have any of these skills? They think, oh yes, of course I have that skill, right? That type of visibility really helps kind of like support students when they're talking to employers or building a resume. Absolutely. Let's see. Yeah, lots
saw when
about
someone
what
asked.
is a micro-credential. That means a lot to a lot of different people from every different group. Jackie, go ahead.
Well, we're, looking at everything from a certificate, anything that's smaller than the full program. And sometimes a micro-credential could be looked at a concentration within a program, but we define it as a credential someone will walk away with. So right now our certificates are mobile. They'll go with the person. We acknowledge that as a certificate. And beyond that, you're thinking about badges, maybe, you're thinking about bundling for professional development. The question of credit versus non-credit plays into that discussion, and those are things we're working through. But, ultimately, it starts at that core, reasoning of why you're even bringing this thing and bundling it together to begin with. What is that? You want to match it to that use case. Is it for an employer? Is it for the student? Is it professional development, non-credit? It really begs to be seen, but we kind of define it a little all over the place, and we are actively trying to norm around that. I'm sure lots of organizations are doing that at the same time, but making sure that we understand what's credit for credit and transcribable and what's not is leading that discussion, and the reasons for that.
Yeah.
Thanks for the great questions.
Yeah. I saw one and I lost it. Where'd it go? There's a lot.
There's one I see on how did you go about assessing what specific skills a course is teaching? Was it learning objectives, faculty chairs? And I think Jackie kind of spoke to that a little bit, but if one of you wants to speak to, and then the second part of the question is, was level of mastery of skill taken into account? I know that's a real challenge as well. So as far as how you went about assessing the skills a course was teaching, could you recap what was the content that was fed into the system to start with that tagging, either Morgan or Jackie?
I could, Morgan, because that has been
a
very high topic of conversation at every one of our check-ins. The faculty love to pick at, making sure what they're looking at is accurate. So we got to hear lots of poking questions. And where we landed was, and this is a process, you have to go through this with your team and kind of go through those conversations so everybody can kind of hear the different perspectives. But we landed one on, the skill. Is it a skill, or is it a knowledge? Is it skills, abilities? Like, what is it? When you look at the skill by itself, it's very limited. It's a word. There's no verb. There's no, like say databases, right? Is it analyzing databases? So we had to do some like norming around that, because the way that the skill shows up is just databases. What we've kind of understood is that first, when you're cleansing, we call it cleansing or scrubbing the courses. When you're looking at that skills list, only the subject matter experts know first, is that even being taught, right? Uncheck it if not. It could have been picked up out of context. It could have been taken in the context of someone would need to have that knowledge coming into the course already, but it's not being taught there. It's assumed that you're going to use the skill you already have to accomplish this thing. But it's also about, understanding that the course itself isn't the end. You're cleansing these courses so that they can get bundled and then look in context at where those skills are really being utilized. One example was like surveying, right? Surveying can mean a lot. It could mean research. It could mean that process, but it could also mean like it popped up in our crime scene investigation work, and people need to have a little bit of surveying background in order to appropriately rope off a crime scene and do those things the right way. Very fascinating. By itself in the course, only the subject matter expert knows the right context for that. And if it's wrong, they uncheck it. If it's accurate, they keep it. And then it comes to life when it gets bundled with all the other, let's say, crime scene investigation certificate courses. And then you see how important is that skill amongst all the other skills that are also relating to that benchmark, if that makes sense. What was the second part of that question? Sorry.
I think level of mastery for a skill.
Yeah, it's similar. Like only the subject matter experts that run these courses know. One person had said, we have 7-week courses, we have 15-week courses. Is it really expected for this person to master the skill in 7 weeks? And if not, then that's up to that subject matter expert to turn that off or not. If they really are, and they know that that's part of their outcomes assessment for that program, that course, then they leave it on. You know, it's great to go through that process, because those are the things and decisions that the human that's doing this work has to make and put it into real context. Great question.
Yeah. And then there was we have one more time for one more that's common, and that is the idea of kind of like common skills, human skills versus these more technical skills. We've done quite a bit of work, both pilot and really structured work on this, where allowing students to see the options that they have based on the unique skill set of their liberal arts degree, and then what would be additive against this more broad range of outcomes in a certificate or in a capstone course their junior, senior year became like a really interesting use for it. So you looking at the skills in all different ways, both mastery, baseline, defining of a particular role. This kind of framework allows you to start to create those relationships of what is mastered, what is assessed, and what is unique to me against this role. So yeah, I think there's quite a few questions. We'll try to get a lot of these answered separately offline, maybe through email or something. But yeah, it's been really a joy to talk with y'all today.
Yes.
Thanks for listening.
Thank you everyone for joining, and thank you again, Jackie. The really helpful information. We really appreciate you taking time to share with us.
Thank you, my pleasure.
All right, have a good rest of your day. Take care.
See y'all.